The first talks aimed at ending the war in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region are underway in South Africa, but fighting has intensified. So what are the chances of bringing the conflict to an end, and what does each side hope to gain? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Thibault. Ethiopia's government and rebels from the northern Tigray region are holding their most high-level talks yet, aimed at ending 2 years of war. But fighting has intensified on the battlefield as both sides seek to strengthen their negotiating position. A ceasefire agreed earlier this year collapsed in August. Thousands have been killed in the conflict and many more have been forced from their homes. The African Union is leading the talks in South Africa, with Nigeria's former president Olusegun Obasanjo and Kenya's Uhuru Kenyatta acting as brokers. International calls for an end to the war have been mounting in recent weeks. The African Union Commission Chair Musa Faki welcomed the start of the talks, saying he was encouraged by the early demonstration of commitment to peace by the parties. He pledged the African Union's continued support for a process to silence the guns towards a united, stable, peaceful and resilient Ethiopia. So how did Ethiopia get here? Well, the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, TPLF, dominated its politics for nearly 30 years until Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came to power in 2018. In November 2020, Abiy ordered a military operation against rebels in Tigray. He accused the group of attacking military bases. Later that month, he declared the operation finished. In June, the Tigray People's Liberation Front recaptured its regional capital, Mekelle. By July, it had advanced into the regions of Afar and Amhara. On October 11th, Ethiopian forces launched a ground offensive and airstrikes a week later. The following month, the government declared a state of emergency after the TPLF retook towns on a road leading to the capital, Addis Ababa. The northern region has been under a blockade for 17 months with no banking, telephone and internet services nor media access. While human rights campaigners have warned of potential abuses by both sides in the conflict.
We want comprehensive, credible, independent investigation into all the atrocities committed in this conflict. 2, we want humanitarian aid as immediate as possible. And we want the international and the regional community to respond to the situation in a manner which is deserving of the gravity of the situation.
Well, let's bring in our guest now for today's Inside Story. From Addis Ababa, Andualem Sisay, a journalist and political commentator. From Sundsvall in Sweden, Teklai Gebre-Michael, associate editor at Tagat, a website documenting possible war crimes in Tigray. And from Nairobi, William Davison, senior Ethiopia analyst at the International Crisis Group. Thank you all for joining us on Inside Story today. Let me start with you, Andualem, in Addis Ababa. Looking at the big picture, how hopeful are you today that an end might be in sight to the war in Tigray?
Thank you very much for having me. I think the fact that both sides have agreed for this peace talk is an encouraging, and it's a positive signal that the people, both sides, whether they are Tigrayans or Ethiopians in general, are hoping from these peace talks because it will bring an end to the suffering of the people, not only in Tigray region but also in the neighboring areas and the whole country in general. So people are hoping that this will be an end to the suffering of the people who have been going through very severe challenges.
Andualem, what are the parties discussing precisely in South Africa?
In my opinion, the first issue would be about ceasefire, and probably the demand from the government side would be, I imagine, that they want the TPLF to put arms down and talk. And on the other side, the TPLF may demand to be raised from the terrorist list and to get some amnesty for its leaders. These are the priorities, I think, on the desk before they go into the detail of what will happen after that, what would be the fate of TPLF and what would be the region's administration and how it should go into normal transition. And all those issues would be the next step, in my opinion.
A number of issues on the table, no doubt. Teklai, in Sweden, if I can come to you, looking at the big picture, Andualem says he's optimistic because the two sides are finally talking. What are the chances, do you think, of bringing this conflict to an end, to an immediate stop? Do you think that we might see some genuine progress in South Africa?
Thank you, Folly, for having me on. I'm afraid I don't share in Andualem's optimism. And the reason for my pessimism is the behavior of the Ethiopian government. Let me start by reminding you a statement that they issued one day before the talks began. The Ethiopian government said that the talks were an opportunity to consolidate, and that's their word, to consolidate supposed military gain that they had made over the previous couple of days in the joint operations with Eritrean forces, or what Eritrean commanders basically commanding Ethiopian forces. They have made some incursions, partly because the Tigrayan forces had retreated from urban areas to avoid urban warfare. And the Ethiopian government seems to believe that the final solution is going to come when they control the capital city of Tigray, Mekelle. And indeed, that was the assumption actually when they set up the talks. The assumption was that by the time the talks would begin, they would have controlled Mekelle, and that would have put them in a position to demand that the Tigrayans totally surrender. And when when it became clear that that wasn't possible, then they found themselves in a very, very awkward situation now. And actually now in the negotiations in South Africa, there has been rumors that the people representing Ethiopian government couldn't actually commit to anything because they didn't think that they would find themselves in the situation. So I don't expect anything positive is going to come. The Ethiopian government has always been clear that the thing that it wants to get from the negotiations is to lessen the pressure from the international community, the enormous pressure, and for them to release funds that they have been withholding because they have been demanding, the IMF and the World Bank, that the Ethiopian government should stop war before it could claim benefits. So I am very, very pessimistic about any outcome from the talks.
William Davison in Nairobi, your thoughts. Is there today enough trust between the two parties that could lead to progress on the substantive issues?
I think perhaps what we are looking for realistically from these talks is a cessation of hostilities agreement that would be renewing the agreement that was in place this year between the federal and Tigray governments. And I think what we should recognize is that these are important negotiations because they represent the beginning of a formal African Union internationally supported process, and therefore they probably in the long run will be the way that this conflict is resolved, and they're definitely the way that it should be resolved. But I do think we have a rather long way to go. As your other guests have made clear, I think the issue is under what terms could we have a cessation of hostilities? Currently, we have active military confrontations inside Tigray, with the Ethiopian Federal Army, supported by the Eritrean Army, attempting to establish control over all federal facilities, as stated by Addis Ababa. Now, whilst the Tigray delegation has said that they do want a cessation of hostilities, they have also said that they want Eritrea's military to withdraw from Tigray. And it is not clear that the Tigray government and forces would agree to a cessation of hostilities if the federal army keeps pushing forward with its Eritrean allies and tries to take complete control
William,
of Tigray.
who would you say is in the stronger position right now?
The strongest position militarily?
Both militarily and at the negotiations in South Africa.
What we know about the military situation is that the fighting's been going on since the 24th of August. Over the last 2 weeks, as Teklai was describing, the Tigray forces have retreated from some urban areas. The Eritrean and Ethiopian militaries have pushed further into Tigray. We've also heard in the last few days about considerable continued resistance from the Tigray forces, particularly around the crossroads town of Adwa. So it seems to be a rather mixed situation, although undoubtedly there was some momentum on the Ethiopian and Eritrean side over the last couple of weeks.
Right. Let me come back to you, Andualem, in Addis. What do we know is happening right now in and around Tigray? What's the extent of what we know? Because, of course, it's been very difficult to get information from the region. The federal government, prior to the talks, had said that it would restore telecommunications services across Tigray. Did they take that action? Did they restore services? Is more aid going into the region to alleviate the humanitarian situation there?
Yes, we also follow those reports from the government side, and we have seen some pictures restoring electricity and delivering food on video on social medias on the areas where now the ENDF or the Ethiopian National Defense Force has taken control. So we have seen those deliveries being done by the government. And when we see on the ground what's happening, as William said, the war is more, the Ethiopian National Defense Force is more advancing into the different regions of Tigray. And now we heard that it is surrounding Mekele, and the assumption by many of the supporters of the Ethiopian government is that Mekele will fall under the Ethiopian National Defense Force, probably before Sunday, before the conclusion of the first round of the talk. So this is what is being observed on the ground.
Tekle, what do you think is happening on the ground? Because the Tigrayan position had been that they were not willing to sit and negotiate with the Addis government unless essential services to the region were restored. Has that happened as far as you know?
Well, no, that hasn't happened. And the reason is because starvation remains an official policy of Ethiopia. And they are not ashamed to state that actually on their local media. They say that starvation remains a policy, and that the way to achieve victory in Tigray is by making the people suffer so that they could submit to the federal order. So Andualem is completely wrong when he said that services has resumed in some parts. Of course, the government has been doing some sort of propaganda to say that in areas that it controlled, it has resumed services. But that simply is a lie. Not only has services been cut off totally from Tigray, the government has also actually banned humanitarian organizations from flying to Tigray to deliver even basic medicine, never mind luxury items like food. And food in Tigray now is a luxury. So nothing has happened in the way of resumption of services. And the reason the Tigrayan government has sent delegates to South Africa is to literally beg the international community to push, to urge the Ethiopian government to relent on its total blockade so that at the very least food could start to trickle in. But I just want to emphasize that Andualem is completely wrong when he said
let's allow Andualem to respond. Andualem, your answer to that.
I think my friend is very much far from the area, and he seems to be more sympathizer of TPLF, and I just want to be to talk about to be as an independent and probably as an Ethiopian, which can feel the suffering of both anyone who's living in Tigray or anywhere else. So, in my opinion, there is no reason why the federal government will not deliver if there is available aid in place. Why they are not delivering it as long as they freed those areas and they control those areas.
Okay,
previously, because the area was controlled by TPLF, they may have challenges to deliver those aid. But now, if they control the area and if there is aid available, why do they not deliver?
Okay.
It doesn't make sense, in my opinion.
Tekle, I'll allow you to respond quickly before I bring back William into the conversation. Tekle, quickly, your response, please.
My mother and my father live in an area supposedly freed by the Ethiopian government. And I haven't been able to speak to them for 2 years. So that just gives you what is happening in Tigray. So what he's saying is a complete lie.
Okay. William, I'm going to bring you back into the conversation to help us expand this and try to understand how the warring parties in Ethiopia today can reach a settlement. And as Tekle alluded to there, we're not just talking about the TPLF and the Ethiopian government. There are other actors involved in this conflict. Eritrea, we know, has sent troops in to help fight alongside the Ethiopian government forces. There are, of course, the Oromo liberation forces in the Oromo region as well, which is also putting pressure on the Addis government. Is there a settlement today, William, that can satisfy all the parties involved in this conflict, whether it's the federal government, the Tigray government, Amhara nationalists, Eritrea government?
There's certainly no immediate prospect of a settlement, and indeed, the problem in Ethiopia and with Eritrea is that some of these differences almost seem irreconcilable. But it is absolutely right to highlight the role of Eritrea in the conflict. We also have a situation where elements from Amhara region, neighboring Tigray, they forcefully seized Western Tigray and still control it. So that will be another very difficult issue to resolve as Tigray demands its return, including the return of the people. This is a very difficult situation. I think if progress is going to be made, it's going to be incremental. And that is why the mediators will be focusing on first getting at least a cessation of hostilities between the federal and the Tigray governments, and then moving on from there to address the issue of Eritrea.
Right. And do you think, and speaking of Eritrea, William, speaking of Eritrea, do you think that the president of Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki, will accept any deal that would see the Tigrayan leadership remain in place?
The understanding, the general understanding of the Eritrean position is that they are involved in this conflict so heavily to see the complete eradication of the TPLF as a political force. And so that is, essentially means removing the leadership and ensuring that they can no longer hold power in Tigray, and that Tigray can no longer be a threat to Eritrea. So really, at the moment, there is no sign that Eritrean leadership is interested in a negotiated settlement. They are pursuing a military solution.
And quickly, the relationship between Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki has been a complicated one. Who's leading who there, you think?
I think that is an important question. Undoubtedly, they have a common purpose, a common enemy in the TPLF. Also, at times, there has been signs of strain in the relationship. It is assumed that President Isaias was not happy with Prime Minister Abiy's efforts to start a peace process and strike a ceasefire. There was also the potential for rivalry in terms of regional leadership in the years ahead. So whilst they have been allied during this war, there certainly is some tension developing between Asmara and Addis Ababa and their leaders.
All right, Andualem in Addis, let me come back to you now. What do you see today as the biggest challenge to these peace talks? Can Abiy Ahmed and the TPLF leadership be brought back together, in your opinion?
I think it all depends on the intent of their meeting. Because are they forced to sit for this meeting, both sides, I mean the Ethiopian government and the TPLF? Are they forced by a third party to sit for this peace talk, or are they forced to resolve the suffering of their people? That's the major question that they should answer. If they think that they are forced, like if the Ethiopian government is forced to sit for peace talks while it is advancing to Mekelle to capture the capital, then it may not make sense for them to make a deal quickly for the ceasefire. Likewise, if the TPLF thinks that they have come to this table because they are losing cities and towns, then this also does not make a solution for this. We don't get solution from this peace talk at the end of the day. So it all depends on the intent of their motive. That's why they went there. Is it because of the influence of US and the UN, or is it because of the suffering of their people? That's the major question at play, in my opinion.
All right, Tekle, your thoughts. What's the solution, and can Abiy and TPLF reconcile?
Well, there is only one thing that has never been tried fully in terms of solution. Everything has been tried and everything has failed. Appeasement has been tried. Threatening with sanctions without actually sanctioning has been tried. But there is one thing that the international community hasn't tried, and that is to actually sanction Ethiopia, to impose arms embargo, and to sanction Eritrea as well, and to support the Tigray Defense Forces with weapons and other ammunition, so that they could defend Tigray and indeed Ethiopia, because Ethiopia now is under the throes of Eritrea. So I think the solution to any serious thinker, to any serious observer of Ethiopia and of the war on Tigray has been very, very clear, and that is to support the Tigray Defense Forces. So that is the solution. But in terms of the talks, if you would give me 1 minute, Andualem said that the Ethiopian Defense Forces and the Eritrean, actually it's the Eritrean commanders using Ethiopian troops as cannon foders. That's what's happening. The idea that they are advancing to Mekelle is a myth. They have been repulsed, even from faraway places. So that's not happening. It was a myth that was used by the Ethiopian regime to galvanize Ethiopians to support it, and also to make the international community believe that military victory was next door, so that they would think it had upper hand in the negotiations. But it's a complete myth, and it's just a lie that people like Andualem are trying to perpetuate.
Okay, let's allow Andualem to respond. And also, I'd like to hear your thoughts about what Tekle said about the international community sanctioning the Ethiopian government and sanctioning Eritrea as well. What do you make of that?
I think your guest has some bias about solution. You cannot solve the solution by arming. Did the U.S. save the Ukraine from being attacked by the Russians by supplying weapons? So you are telling the same thing to happen in Tigray region. When you supply arms, that means you are allowing more suffering, because you are sitting in Sweden and you are not feeling any of the suffering of the people. You are only serving only the purpose of those who supply the weapons, who have their own political agenda and geopolitical interest in the region, and who are using TPLF as their Trojan horse. So you have no clue, my friend. What are you talking? You cannot solve by arming people and by allowing more days.
Ukraine has been able to.
I'm sorry to hear from
Ukraine has been able to defend itself. Ukraine has been.
Such kind of statement. It's very shameful.
Folly, in terms of Ukraine.
Go ahead.
It's not a solution at all.
Ukraine has been able to defend itself partly because it has received Western support. And that is exactly what should happen in Tigray. And actually, there should be more support to Tigray, because the suffering in Tigray is much, much worse than the suffering in Ukraine. And I don't understand why the international community can't think of solutions similar to the ones being applied in Ukraine.
All right, let's ask William in Nairobi. William, what can foreign diplomats involved in these talks do? What can an important element be that the international community can bring to the table right now?
I think they're doing the right thing finally in terms of a more concerted, more focused, more high-level international response to this absolutely devastating war. We've seen possibly tens of thousands of combatants die in the fighting in the last 2 months. That's in addition to the hundreds of thousands that have been killed, partly as a result of the government's blockade, the federal government's blockade that is enacted on Tigray during this war. So the focus on negotiations is correct, and there should be more forceful action taken. If any of the belligerents here continue to use starvation as a weapon of war, if they continue to target civilians, and if they continue to prolong this conflict. But ultimately, what is needed is for all of the Ethiopian and Eritrean actors to understand that there is no military solution here. We are only going to see further suffering. No matter how difficult and how entrenched the differences are, the way out of this is to begin to try and negotiate them around the negotiating table rather than on the battlefield.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for a very lively and interesting discussion. Andualem Sisay in Addis, Tekle Michael in Sweden, and William Davison in Nairobi. Thank you very much for being with us. And thank you for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can, of course, also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly, Thibault, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye for now.